Buongiorno a tutti e benvenuti. Purtroppo siamo in pochi perché da quello che mi hanno detto entrare in
Good morning, everybody. Unfortunately, there's not many of us here because I've heard that there is a lot of traffic out there. But nevertheless, we have to start. So welcome to Gem Talk, this traditional appointment which is born out of the cooperation with the Italian exhibition group and the Italian Gemmological Institute, I.G.I. This is a traditional appointment also because the fair is not just the fair of exhibitors and buyers or visitors, but this has become a true cultural hub. During the fair, culture is disseminated. And of course, the culture of Germany is an incredibly fascinating topic. And today, we have decided to tackle a topic that is right at the heart of all gemmologists, that is how gemstones can be so different. So they might have a certain essence, which is then totally transformed by light. This interaction with the electromagnetic radiation of white light transforms the beauty of gems. And together with me today, I have two gemmologists, two extraordinary gemmologists to talk about extraordinary gemstones. Lucia Gori, professor at the I.G.I. Milan, and Ludovica Faldi, analyst of the I.G.I. Milan laboratory. Ludovica and Lucia will take us in the world of special optical effects and optical effects that really make gemstones extraordinary. When they give their lectures, they don't usually sit down. They like to walk around, and they do that also to prevent students from being distracted. They have to follow the teacher with their eyes, and so they can't fall asleep during their lessons. So I know that also today they're not going to sit down on their armchairs, but they're going to move about. So without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to Lucia, who is going to talk about some optical phenomena. Thank you very much, Loredana. It is really great to pop up at the back of students and find out whether they're listening to you or not. Anyhow, when I started preparing my presentation, the first problem I encountered was entertaining you in view of the fact that in front of me I would have had many different people. Maybe colleagues who already know about gemstones, students, people working in this industry who do not know about certain peculiarities of gemstones. And this is why I have decided to organize my presentation providing you with some pearls that may be appealing to one kind of audience or another kind. So I will intersperse my presentation with these small curiosities. First of all, what do we mean when we talk about phenomenal gemstones or gemstones with special optical effects? Gemstones interact with light like any other body. But there are some effects that are present in all gemstones, like color, shine. And there are optical effects that occur only with some gemstones. That are totally different one from the other, but can be grouped into this heterogeneous group. So the first question is, why are some gemstones phenomenal? Curiosity comes first and leads to science and research. So why does this happen in some gemstones and not in others? Well, this is due to a special interaction with light. Every one of these gems has a different kind of interaction because of its nature, its structure, its inclusions, and other aspects we shall debate. Of course, we cannot talk about all phenomenal gemstones. We do not have time for that. So I have decided to focus on diffusion. I have realized that at the Institute, we tend to talk about diffusion in very simple terms, just saying that light interacts with particles and is scattered around, and that's it. Conversely, today I would like to go into greater detail. And that's the first Easter egg, so to see, with a surprise for gemmologists in this room. Light is a form of radiating energy. It cannot be created, it cannot be destructed, it can be converted in other forms of energy. What happens to energy when it interacts with the gemstones? Well, this is the right way to try and understand its behavior. Gemmologists are used to thinking in terms of wavelength and not of energy. The two magnitudes are strictly related. The shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy transmitted. Therefore, we must now try and understand what happens during this interaction. So, together with you, we shall explore some of these interactions, which are countless, of course. There are countless interactions of light with gemstones. And very often they occur together. Some are predominant, so that's a predominant effect I see, but usually there are many different interactions together. I shall try to simplify and focus on specific types of effects, but many effects can take place contemporaneously and interact one with the other. So we will focus on diffusion, on reflection, internal and external reflection, absorption and fluorescence emission is something that I'm going to take for granted, and we will focus on diffraction and interference. Let me make one step back and let's play a game. Imagine you're in a room in the dark with the door opened onto another room where somebody switches the light on. If we're close to the door, we remain in the dark. We see a cone of light, but we are still in the dark. If in the other room they switch on the radio, we hear the radio. Maybe not so well as in that room, but we hear it. Sound and light waves are both waves, but why do I hear the sound but I'm not illuminated by light? Because of the wavelength. Sound has a wavelength that is close to the size of the door. In other words, A at the center of a piano has a wavelength of approximately 1 meter. When I read that, I thought, gosh, how interesting. So when it gets at the edge of the door, there is a very special phenomenon, refraction, so that the border of the door sort of emits waves, and the sound actually bends in this way. Light doesn't behave in this way because it has a wavelength which is very, very small, and therefore this does not occur. Let's now analyze these events with regard to gemstones. Diffusion. In gemstones and in our daily life, we can, I'm oversimplifying now, but we can think of diffusion in three categories, depending on the size of the particles interacting with light. If the particles are much smaller than the size of light, I'm thinking about an oxygen or nitrogen molecule in the air, then I have the so-called Rayleigh diffusion. If the particles are more or less the same size as light, then I have the Mie diffusion. And if the particles are much larger than the wavelength of light, then I have a geometrical diffusion. Let's see what happens with gemstones.
So the relay diffusion with the small particles is responsible for the blue light of the sky. When we saw the astronauts on the moon, the sky was black because there is no such light in the moon. So the light is related to the wavelengths. Longer wavelengths are diffused less than the others. So we have a blue color which is deprived from the wavelengths that tend to the red color. So when we have sunset, as the layer of the atmosphere crossed by the sun rays is larger, we see more of the red side instead of the blue side, which is dispersed in the atmosphere. And so on the moon, we don't have the blue color. In theory, when there is moonlight, we should see this diffusion phenomenon, which is called Tyndall. But it's a problem with our eyes. We're not so sensitive to the residual luminosity that we could see in the night sky. Also, the blue light of the mountains is due to this type of diffusion. And well, without the instruments that we have available now, also Leonardo da Vinci had realized that with the splendid hues that he used in his pictures. So these fire sunsets, as we call them, and we find this in the orthoclasium, so-called moon stones, which interact with the light in this way, with this type of diffusion. It's true there are moonstones which have a pink hue or a orange hue, but that is due to another phenomenon, that is a selective absorption due to chemical elements which are external to the structure. Think of what happens with the other diffusion that has with the particles which are of the same size or bigger than the light. And think what happens when we are in a dusty room, or what happened, for example, when you could smoke in the cinemas, where you clearly saw the cone on the projector's line. Well, in that case, the dust spreads the light, but as these particles are bigger in size, the spreading depends less on the wavelength, and so the light is dispersed in a uniform way, and we have a white light cone. And this is what happens with the opal opalescence is due to this phenomenon. Here we have a pink Peruvian opal, and this is due to the superimposition of two phenomena, that is selective absorption plus this feeling of fog, which is due to the diffusion. Another gem which had been a bit ignored, sometimes we don't speak in our classrooms about the sunflower effect in sunflower quartz. Here we have two examples. It was used as a central stone for some design creations, and this sunflower effect is due to this type of diffusion, the so-called Mie diffusion. Well, we can't see very well here because we should see the stone moving, but let's say that it is concentrated on the top of these stones, where we see a sort of a cloud, a whitish cloud. When the particles become bigger, I have another phenomenon that is water particles mixed together, and so I have a sheen. For example, in the obsidian, I have this effect, and this stone, well, I like it very much. And when we can also have such a beautiful golden sheen. And when the particles which interact with light, so when we have particles which are structured and organized according to special characteristics of the crystal, for example, in these stones where we have all the particles distributed in a horizontal way. Well, unfortunately, I would have liked to show you a chrysoberyl, but I was not able to introduce it. Anyway, I wanted to show you the difference in the light. The cabochon is inclined, while in the other one you could see a very clear color because there are small inclusions which are much thinner, and so the eye is very well defined. The gâteauillage is called. Well, normally I explain this phenomenon by means of spools. Well, if you have a spool, you will have the impression that at the end of the spool there is a sort of a white line where there is light which is impacting. Well, the phenomenon is more or less the same. Normally, students look at me in a strange way because normally there are no longer any spools in the houses, but I wanted to introduce that. And we will introduce that in the presentation so that they understand what a spool is like. Obviously, when I have different families of inclusion, I will no longer have a light line going through the stone, but we'll have more lines organized based on the host, let's say, and its internal geometry. So the result will be this one light line recalling a star with several points or heads, and I will be able to have 6 or even 12 of these heads or spikes. Well, I don't have a video, but I can describe this situation for you. In Sri Lanka, where these stones are much more common as compared to other places, there is a tradition whereby in any spike of the star in these corundum, they identify in these spikes a sort of a trajectory of human life that is faith, hope, and fate. And that's a system, if you want, a system of storytelling at the time when you make a ceremony, for example. Well, Christmas has just finished, but in fact, we have another tradition which is related to these stones. 2 years ago, one of our customers asked us to prepare a newsletter dedicated to Christmas stones or gems. Well, I said, what's the problem with that? But then I started to say, well, Christmas Day, well, diamonds, rubies. Well, I had to think about that. And at the same time, I started to say, okay, star corundum, I thought about that. And then I discovered that there is a gem which has its own name, which is called the Star of Artaban. And there is a character created by Henry van Dyck, who was a professor of English language and literature in the US. Well, in 1907, he invented this character. It's a sort of a fourth Magi. And he imagines that together with the king Magus, there was another one who had this gift. And each of the gifts has a symbolic characteristic.
On his way, there are several obstacles, people needing his help, and their help, and his helping them requires that he has to sell these gemstones. So when he finally meets Jesus, Jesus is already on the cross. So this holy king thinks that he has failed the mission of his life. I believe we have all had this experience. But then all of a sudden, the angels come telling him, all the people you helped were actually Jesus. So you have accomplished your mission. So hence the name Star of Artaban, which was given to this amazing star sapphire that can be viewed at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History to recall this human king who had many weaknesses and best represents us much better than the three Magi. Right. To conclude my presentation, I would like to pay homage to our adventuring quartz. And this is to say that when there are chaotic inclusions inside a gemstone, here we have microfoxite scattered around the quartz body, we have this glitter-like effect. Reflections are random. I do no longer see the star, but I see a shiny, glittery gemstone. The same happens with sandstone, with the sandstone. Here we have very small inclusions of hematite predominantly, some cases also copper. Sorry, the animation does not work. And now the cherry on the cake, the play of color in the opal, which is related to a special structure of the opal. At the beginning, scientists used to think that the play of color of corals was due to a layered structure. So they were really surprised when in the 70s, using the instrument you see on the left, which is a scanning electron microscope, the SEM for friends, they were confronted with a totally different scenario. The picture is black and white because these are the pictures that this microscope provides us with, using electrodiffused electrons. And in other words, here we see a population of lapispheres, very small spheres of silica, embedded in a silica gel, which is less rich in silica and more rich in water, keeping together all these microspheres. And they realized that this is a complex interference and diffraction phenomenon due to the microspheres, which are all organized in terms of size and are stacked like oranges in a box or a crate. There you go. You can see the graphic and you can see the opal. So you can appreciate the noble part, that is the area with the optical phenomenon resting on a layer, which is the potch, and has no such a phenomenon with a matrix at the bottom. So if we could make an electronic microscope image, we would see all these spheres of different size and not so well ordered in the lower area. Conversely, the area that produces the play of color is characterized by spheres organized according to size and layered in rows. Depending on the size of the microspheres, the color is different. So when I see a blue play of color, I know that we have very, very small microspheres. Conversely, when I see the red, which is also one of the most rare colors because larger spheres are more rare, I have those beautiful red flashes, which is the most sought after type of play of color. So this is what scientists expected to find when analyzing the structure of the opal. This is actually the structure of labradorite. But the optical effect of diffraction and interference is the same one. So I have these flashes of light, monochromatic light, across the gemstone. But here I truly do have a layered structure. It is like a cake with different layers. Each layer has a different refraction index, and I have these monochromatic flashes across the gemstone. Right, I would like to leave the floor now to my colleague Ludovica, who's going to talk about another optical effect, which I have deliberately neglected so that she can talk about that. And I'm looking forward to her presentation because I do not know much about this topic. Thank you very much, Lucia. Right, let's move on to the next presentation, but first I have a question for you. Of all the optical effects you've described, which is the one you like the most? It's hard. It's like asking a mother which is her favorite child. Do you want an answer as a gemologist or as an answer as Lucia? Lucia loves opals. Right, because we also have to think that we can also be consumers, people appreciating gemstones, independent of the fact that we investigate their physical and optical characteristics. Right, prior to giving the floor to Ludovica, I would like to make a remark. These optical effects are visible when the surface is curved. That is, when cut was not so predominant for gemstones. Today we'll love well-cut, multifaceted gemstones, and we pay attention to the cut to make sure it has been done properly. But in the past, we didn't have all these machines. And in ancient times, the optical effects were greatly appreciated. And I remember that merchants went to Mogok looking for ruby gemstones, and they studied the rough gemstones to imagine the optical effect that could be achieved when the gemstone was cut in a curved way. They wanted the star effect, and the inclusions of rutillium needles were highly praised because of the star effect, because otherwise they would not have achieved effects of the same level. So in the past, gemstones with this cabochon type of cut were greatly appreciated. Right. Ludovica is going to talk about chameleon gemstones. And of course, these have to be cut with multiple facets so that we can best appreciate the changing color. Ludovica, you have the floor. Well, thank you very much. I am taking on the baton for the presentation, and I'm going to talk to you about the so-called chameleon gemstones, which are also part of phenomenal gemstones. Lucia has shown us that gemstones that without their optical effect might have been neglected. Also, thanks to the introduction by Loredana, we've seen that sometimes the cut in these gemstones was not so important, because what was important was the optical effect. And the same is true, albeit in a slightly different way, for this last group of gemstones, the metameric gemstones. Color change gemstones can change their color depending on the illuminating source. This is rather an unusual phenomenon, a rare one, especially if you think about large and transparent gemstones. In general, we find small samples, and they're not all that pure. But color change is extremely fascinating, and color change can be mild or significant and intense.
So what happens to these stones? Well, depending whether they are illuminated by natural light or artificial light, they completely change their color. Well, these are not extremely pure stones, and sometimes they're not so large. And in these cases, the quality is given by the percentage of
dal 5% al 100%
of change. Some of these stones have a 100% change possibility. Let's say that the average quality is about 50 and 60% change, up to top qualities, which go up to 80, 90% of change. Well, we call this metamerism, and it is called color change, and sometimes it is even called Alexandrite color, and that comes from the name of the most important stone. Now, I will give you an overview of the most known stones, starting from Alexandrite, which is a variety of chrysoberyl. It's artificially illuminated, and it's called emerald during the day and ruby during the night. Its name is given to a dedication made by Tsar Alexander II, because it was found in 1934 in the Urals, and the color recalled the color of the Russian flag of the time. And then the second is an andesine, which belongs to the family of festspades, which is less known than Alexandrite. The extraction mining place is mainly Tibet and Mongolia. And in this case, we move from green to purple. And then corundum, which is the family which gives us the ruby and sapphire, which are very well known, but also a number of metameric stones with different colors depending on the mining site. It's the green and red and purple colors are the most known, but there are many other colors. And then fluorite, which is not so much used in jewelry because it's very hard. And it's not so wearable. But let's say that also this stone, which is more for collectors than for jewels, well, above all in the Pakistan variety, you can find a change in type going from purple to blue. And then sultanite, which is another of these famous stones, together with alexandrite. It is a fascinating variety of changing diaspora. And its name is dedicated to the 36 sultans which set up the Ottoman kingdom. And in this case, we have hues going from yellow to red, and then granites. Well, an endless number of gems with different colors. Now, this group of stones started to be successful just in the 80s because a special mix was discovered which had colors which were very similar to alexandrite, so they started to be used for that reason. But then many other gems were discovered and which are very similar to alexandrite, so varieties which go from blue and to other colors. And like all other stones which are very much appreciated in the market, well, you also find imitations, and among the most common ones are the synthetic corundum, which is called Alessandretta, recalling the name of the family, and which is mainly the stone which is brought to us in the labs. They tell us, I have a very pure 90% alexandrite, and we say, okay, bring it to us, and we examine it. And then glass, unfortunately, is the material which imitates these characteristics. Well, I started my career as a lab analyst, and in the lab, we mainly focus on diamonds. So 80% of the times we focus on diamonds and we speak with diamonds. Well, I forgot to show you that despite the fact that there are stones which are not so pure and which are not so large, well, in fact, there is a designer who used this alexandrite for a very beautiful collection. He is Rubeus Milano, about 50 pieces, and they are very beautiful, although they're not so pure. And there is a combination of goldsmith art and stones, which are very, very rare. So it's 47 pieces with alexandrite from 2 to almost 70 carats. So the opposite of what I said at the beginning, so not so beautiful stones and not so big stones. This is not the case here. These are very beautiful stones, very beautiful pieces. And then now we will speak of the same optical effect applied to diamonds. We know that diamonds have a color. They are born with a color. They are cut with a color. They are classified with a given color. Well, sometimes labs classify them in a different way. Well, it may be a bit subjective, but that is the color. It will never become more yellow, for example. Well, I'm killing this myth because, in fact, there are diamonds which can indeed change their color temporarily. It's not an irreversible change, depending whether they are heated or kept in the dark. Well, when these conditions are suppressed, the gem goes back immediately to its initial color. So we have the charm of fancy diamonds because we are speaking about colors which are green, yellowish, yellow, greenish with a gray component. So fancy diamonds with the intrinsic charm of these stones. And then if we add the change in color, well, you may well understand why we are so interested in these stones. And then on top of that, we know very little about those stones, this group of stones, because they were discovered pretty late. So we realized about their presence pretty late, and also because very few studies and research works have been carried out. First, because there is a shortage of these stones, and also because we cannot really understand the reason for this change in color. So let's have a look at chameleon diamonds in history. Well, the first report dates back to 1866 when George Alphen, a diamond trader in Paris, well, he spoke about this diamond which had been bought as a green diamond. The customer said that she never wore it, but removing it from the shelf, the diamond became brown. So she thought that she had been subject to the fraud, she had been cheated, and she went back to the shop. And, well, perhaps she made a mistake because she should have taken that diamond for herself. And then in 1947, thanks to an intuition by Peter Kaplan, there was the first official report about these diamonds, and Peter Kaplan realized that polishing the diamond, well, that diamond would change color, ranging from yellow greenish to a very intensive hue of yellow. So studies were started, and in 1995 there was the first publication of an article, a small article, on a single sample, because we didn't have so many samples available. And that was the first article published, which was then enlarged by GIA. So the date that we're interested in is 2001, because it is the year when these chameleon diamonds were officially discovered. So there was an auction, Christie's auction, where 4.41 carat diamond was sold for $240,000. You will see it in a while. It's a very particular gem. It was presented really as if it were a new baby, something that had never happened before.
In 2007, another important event. Chopard bought the first diamond, and so far the largest diamond, one of the most pure and largest diamonds, 31.31 carats, a very large gemstones, and he made a ring out of that. Right, let me show you something rather than just talking about that. So that's a Christie's auction diamond. This is before and this is after. That is, the green diamond is a diamond with stable light under the sunlight. The very same diamond, if heated, totally changes color and tone, and it becomes an intense yellow, day and night. I mean, we're not talking about a hue, we're talking about a considerable change in color. This diamond was presented with the double certificate plus an attachment by Christie's. The double certificate was a certificate by GIA from 99, where it was defined as a fancy dark gray, yellowish green gemstone. Usually people don't like it when there are too many colors and hues, so the customers ask for as little hues as possible. But in this case, the hues were important because they show how much the diamond can change. Then we have the Gobelin certificate, dated 2001, with a totally different identification. It is no longer a fancy dark, it is a deep yellowish green diamond. Next to these two certificates, Christie's adds an attachment for the first time in history, explaining the extreme significance of this gemstone, explaining what chameleon diamonds are and the mysteries they contain and the reason why they're so mysterious, and defines this stone of over 4 carats as the gemstone that best represents chameleon diamonds because the color is saturated. After the heating, it's very intense. It has fabulous hues during transition, and the gemstone has an exceptional color already when we talk about its stable color. Well, let's have a look at the jewels. Right, we have spoken about Chopard's 31.31 carat gemstone that you can see here on this beautiful ring. Christie's diamond with the auction in 2011 in Hong Kong, 8.88 carats, and the De Beers Chameleon collection featuring a 1.53 carat gemstone surrounded by rough fancy diamonds. Some have been slightly faceted, and they all feature different colors. So we're talking about gemstones that have not been cut in a cabochon fashion. They are rich in facets, and in some cases have very big gemstones. And let's now further analyze the King of Chameleons, which was bought in 2007. It was set in this ring, which is a very important ring with this spiral of fancy diamonds, with grays, brown, and green diamonds. But notwithstanding all this amazing scaffolding, the diamond actually attracts our attention and is the star. It is a significant size, classical oval cut. It was presented in 2008 at Basel World. Marion Cotillard wore it when winning the Oscar as Best Actress. When Caroline Schäufele, co-chairwoman of Chopard, was interviewed, she said, "This is one of my favorite gemstones and rings." Putting together the fascination of fancy gemstones, think about such a big, pure green fancy diamond. But on top of that, this can also change color. When she was asked, how did you find these gemstones, she just said, the stone found us. Christie's auction again in 2004. This is a brooch from the AK collection. It's called a chameleon serpent pendant brooch. So we have the serpent. Chameleon refers to the gemstone. As a matter of fact, here we have green chalcedonium, opals, diamonds, and the flower at the center consists of rubies and a pavé of chameleon diamonds, interspersed with rubies. Some more technical information, but I will be very, very brief. Do not worry, I promise. Here you can see some examples, some samples. The little we know about these diamonds allows us to divide them into two groups, the classical and the reverse ones, depending on the change of color occurring when the diamond is heated or kept in the dark. let's start with the first group, where we find most of the chameleon diamonds that are around. The change in this first group occurs both with heat and with darkness, so they're both photo and thermochromatic. The change, I mean, these are the first 4 diamonds in their 2 colors. So the color changes from grayish, greenish colors, but when heated or kept in the dark, the color becomes much more intense. Have a look at the heart. What a beautiful yellow it becomes, with orange hues or even pink. Or in some cases, the yellow component totally disappears and we have a brown-green intense color. The first 2 diamonds on the first row are changing when kept in the dark, and here you can see that the change is not so intense compared to the heart and the round diamonds that show increased saturation. In the lower row, we see the so-called reverse diamonds, because the change goes the opposite way, from a more dense color to a weaker color. So we can find that grayish-greenish color that was the stable color of the classical ones. And here, the change occurs only through heating. If you position these gemstones in the dark, even for a long time, nothing is going to happen. No color change in the darkness. This is the only other extended study that has been carried out on 39 samples. It is a study carried out by the GIA, explaining how change occurs. How it occurs and not why it occurs, because this is still a big question mark. So out of these 39 samples, more than 80% belong to the classic group. Amongst the classic ones, the change occurs predominantly when heated, and the change starts at 100-120 degrees, and maximum saturation is achieved at about 140 degrees. What happens if we heat to higher temperatures? This has been done up to 300 degrees, and it was possible to see that after or above 140 degrees, there is no significant change. So the color change obtained at 140 degrees does not progress when heating is continued.
So you see that these stones pass from olive green, well, it's not a very gemmological term, to orange, yellow hues or tones, which are very much appreciated. So these scientists told us that there are things that we can observe naked-eyed, and there are other situations that we can discover only in the laboratory. So physically, I can heat my diamond, or I can keep it in the dark to see whether there are some changes. And there is a yellowish fluorescence, and it's very strange. It doesn't say that if a diamond has this yellow fluorescence, it is necessarily a chameleon diamond. Well, we often say, beware of these yellowish tones. Well, these are situations which are very clear to understand. Once subjected to UV radiation, the stone continues to remain yellow for a long period. And then the other 2 characteristics are more specific. It is a structure that you can appreciate thanks to diamond view, and which alternates yellow, green, blue, and inert tones. It is a very particular characteristic as far as diamonds are concerned. Diamond view ER spectroscopy, which helps us understand that these are 1,2A and 1B diamonds with dominant A aggregates, although there are small differences according to the main two characteristics of the two types. How can we identify them? What do we find in the certificates? Well, they are identified like other stones. So a tone is given. Well, first of all, you check whether it is natural, although we still have some doubts. So after checking that it is a natural diamond, we identify a color, a name is given to this color, and then in the same of CHAMELEON diamonds, a note is added specifying that the color of that stone may change temporarily if slightly heated, as GIA says, or if kept in the dark for a certain period of time. So these stones are called CHAMELEON stones. Now, going back to the difference between color stones, metameric stones, and diamonds. So who wins the challenge? Well, I can say that in the case of stones that normally were not so successful, because sometimes the endless number of hues and tones, green, gray, well, they say we want fancy yellow, we want fancy blue, fancy green. So we're used to seeing that these are the most important stones. Well, in fact, these characteristics make these niche stones a bit more important. They enhance them. So in this case, perhaps collectors are the winners who believe that precious stones are those which are unique and which have a sort of a background or history. Thank you.
Grazie Ludovica.
Many thanks, Ludovica. Well, I have some comments to make. First, who could have said that keeping diamonds in the dark, well, they become even more beautiful. So we're used to wear them, but in this case, their color improves. And then secondly, who knows how many of us have eliminated some diamonds which had this characteristic, not being aware of that. And who knows how many jewelers or producers are aware of the existence of these diamonds, because I doubt that they are so well known. And then a note as a gemmologist. Well, in the labs, we have the problem of synthetic diamonds, and they continuously ask us to have the machines, the devices, how to use them, HP, etc. Well, you may realize that one characteristic of a diamond doesn't mean that the stone is artificial or natural. So if you trust all those devices, well, please remember that when there is a big production, those instruments can work. But when we are faced with just one stone, we have to investigate it based on advanced technologies and devices. And this is the recommendation that we give to all producers. So be aware when you use those devices. Well, the problem is the context. If you don't consider the context of the stone, and you can consider the context if you are aware of all the possible options that you may face. If you have a false positive as a result, well, also the battery exhausted or the temperature of the environment, because the operating range of some devices is limited. Well, if you're in a cold laboratory or in a very heated laboratory, well, that may have an impact on the device. So how many of us actually read the instructions of a given device? So this is to tell you that we should be aware of the context, whether we are in the right context. Well, in the laboratory, the context should be the right one. Well, another point, when you speak about heating, well, I think that most of us think of heating of corundum, which goes up to 1600 degrees. Well, in this case, with diamonds, we have a more limited type of heating. So even if you make those tests, you know that you cannot damage the diamond in that case. Well, I'd like to add a note. This is the basic case because the yellow fluorescence is helpful for us because it tells us that the stone is not artificial and it's not been treated, because for the time being, CHAMELEON diamonds have not been identified and replicated, so it's not possible to replicate them. So for us, that's a big help. And then another point, think of all the new technologies, and nature still surprises us, something that we cannot understand. How come that these diamonds change color? And what's interesting is, well, think that diamond is not only a gem, but it is the most studied mineral in the world. Probably there are more than 400 scientific articles every year which are published. So if you think of that, you say, well, who knows? Scientists are still working on that, and they have been doing that for 20 years, and a conclusion has not been drawn yet. So hopefully next time. Yes. Now, are there questions? Are you curious about this topic? Microphone, otherwise we cannot hear the question. Interpreters cannot hear.
Allora, ha ragione.
You're right. Heating lasts very little, and if the change takes place with non-visible saturation, it's difficult to see it naked-eyed. Well, in fact, it's enough to, for example, have a lighter and use that lighter to note immediately a change in the color, because the change in the color is immediate. Well, when you remove the lighter, the diamond goes back to its stable color. And the same applies if I put the diamond in a shelf or in a safe, and if I take it out, and there is a few seconds where I can really appreciate the changing color. So it's more a question of an idea, because unfortunately we will never be able to wear it in the unstable color, in its unstable tone. So it's a temporary type of change.
Well, it happened to me, and I almost had a heart attack. I mean, how would you feel if you have a diamond, observe it under the microscope as you are looking at it? It changes color. So for a second I thought, oh my God, perhaps I had something toxic for lunch. Anyway, this change happened with the heat of the microscope, which is about 40 degrees. I had kept it under the microscope for quite some time. Anyhow, the time to remove it, put it on the bench, and ask for help from the spectroscopy, and the gemstone had gone back to its original color. So they thought I had gone crazy. But luckily enough, I had one article about this, and so I didn't have a heart attack, and nobody thought I didn't think I was crazy. And then after some further investigations, we realized that we were confronted with a very special gemstones. But the customer didn't like this, nevertheless. Anyhow, there are some diamonds that actually change color also with the body temperature. Well, I have an idea. Some jewelers making jewels with chameleon gemstones or diamonds could actually hide a heat source underneath the gemstone to actually show the changing color. Yes, we must patent this idea. We have given an idea to jewelers. Right. Thank you very much for being here. For sure, we will see you again in September. And I'm very glad to announce a very special moment. That is, this year, the Italian Gemmological Institute is going to celebrate its 50 years of existence. So for 50 years, we have been disseminating gemmological culture, and we're very proud of that. Also thanks to the gemmologists who came before us, and thanks to our present staff. And thanks to our audience as well.